Welcome to the NCO Journal podcast, where we explore NCO professional development. This is a podcast series where we discuss published articles with authors and provide a forum for the open exchange of ideas, information, and solutions. I'm your host, Staff Sergeant Brandon Cox, Senior Editor of the NCO Journal. With us is Sergeant First Class Osvaldo Akite, the NCOIC of the NCO Journal, Tony Mena, a Senior Editor for the NCO Journal, and Timothy Clements, also a Senior Editor for the NCO Journal. Today we discuss the article, Developing Strategically-Minded Enlisted Leaders, written by Staff Sergeant Nicholas DiMichele. He serves in the United States Army National Guard and currently works as a defense analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy. Thank you for joining us. Before we kick things off, could you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. And please call me Nick. A little bit about myself. Spent 9 years active duty infantryman, serving in various units ranging from 425 in Alaska, 173rd, and finally 82nd Airborne. Finished out my time on active duty as a platoon sergeant in the 82nd, multiple operational combat deployments, still serving in the National Guard part-time status. And I actually came off active duty in 2020, and I decided I wanted to go back to school. Ended up completing 2 master's degrees, one of them at Georgetown. During that time in school, I used it as an opportunity to take on internships and fellowships to learn, how to work in a civilian environment. Some of these internships and fellowships included working for a member of Congress, working on House Foreign Affairs Committee, Executive Office of the President for the U.S. Trade Representative, and then finally finding my place in the Pentagon, working for DOD in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy. So that's kind of the 10,000-foot view of kind of where I was and where I am today.
Nice. Thank you for joining us. As a start, what does the defense analyst in the Office of Secretary for Defense do? Or could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I said, I currently work Office of Secretary of Defense for Policy, and I've actually worked in a couple different offices since joining the Pentagon. The first office was in Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs, and in that office, my main portfolio was supporting defense support of civil authorities, and more specifically on wildfires. So, in essence, if you were ever in the National Guard or Reserve unit and got activated for wildfires or some other domestic reason, it was work through the office that I was in. Other topics I kind of worked on in the office were critical infrastructure, hurricanes, and some space policy issues. I actually moved offices still within policy. I now work in international security affairs, and I'm more specifically, I'm on the Ukraine desk right now. So as you can imagine, the office is a little busy. In essence, there's never a dull day where you know exactly what's going to happen or what you might be working on.
Absolutely. And as the premier NCO professional development publication for the Army, I just want to first off say thank you for providing this article. It's exactly the type of thing that we're looking for, and we're very appreciative that you gave it to us. So speaking about, your article is described as developing strategically minded enlisted leaders. So the first question I have for you is kind of describing what you mean by strategically minded, maybe the different levels of the organization and what exactly you want to recommend.
So strategically minded, I'll start by saying that this is how I think of strategically minded, but other people may have other interpretations of what that actually means. But broadly, I think of strategically minded as policy making at the highest levels. So decisions from whether it be the White House, Pentagon, Congress, NATO, thinking about geopolitical interactions, all the various national strategies that the U.S. government puts up, I think fall into that category. So like national defense strategy, that type of stuff. Going a little bit more specific, I tend to think about the acronym of DIME when it comes to strategically minded, and it stands for Diplomatic, Information, Military, and Economic. And I imagine DIME as kind of like these, if you'll visualize it with me, kind of dials in front of you. We can turn them up and down depending on what the situation might need. So, for example, if there's some crisis or event going on around the world and the U.S. is determining the best course of action, we may start to look at turning the diplomatic and information dials up while also keeping maybe military and economic dials down. If the situation changes, we may need to move those dials up higher along with military and economic dials. So really kind of thinking, these elements of national power. Going a little bit more specific on the strategically minded question for myself, I also think of kind of how DoD policy is created and what entities impact it. When decisions are kind of being made, there's a lot of coordination involved internally within the departments. And this coordination includes OSD policy, joint staff, COCOMs, personnel and readiness, acquisition and sustainment, and other various stakeholders kind of formulate this very high policy that makes it all the way down to the tactical level. It might not be the most exciting thing to understand or learn about, but I think it really is an important process to know how policy is formulated and how it trickles down to that tactical level. So that's kind of how I think of what I say when I mean like strategically minded individuals.
So I guess what does that look like as an NCO? You're talking about a sergeant or staff sergeant down, in the line unit. What does that look like when an NCO down at that tactical level is thinking strategically?
Yeah, and I'll admit that a strategically minded NCO is not a novel idea. There have been publications put out by the chairman and his senior enlisted advisor that are really leaning forward on this idea of creating strategically minded officers and NCOs. And what a strategically minded NCO looks like goes back to what I mentioned earlier on DIME and DoD processes. NCOs being able to understand the how and why of certain policy decisions and either explaining to troops at that, platoon, company, battalion level, or being senior enlisted advisors to commanders. It's being able to look at the kind of bigger picture and understand what role my unit is currently playing in that larger picture. Speaking kind of personally here, I've seen a few times where a unit will be on deployment and, you have those blinders on and, people don't fully understand the why and importance of kind of what we're doing and where they are. And it's being able to take that step back and know the importance of, personnel, equipment, training, et cetera, going to various parts of the world for force projection or building interoperability or train and advise missions. And kind of, finally, a strategically minded NCO understands the external processes at work that impact DoD policy. We talk about like government shutdowns, and that it falls within Congress, and understanding that Congress approves these defense budgets for fiscal years, and that has trickle down effects all the way to the tactical level. Understanding interagency cooperation to achieve desired goals of the United States. So strategically minded NCO, in my opinion, understands the internal and external processes and factors that impact DoD policy.
So I guess, let's talk a little bit about, so this is important for an NCO to understand and know about. So how does an NCO become strategically minded? And in your article, you mentioned a couple different ways, but I'll let you kind of maybe summarize some of the different things available for NCOs out there.
Yeah, so, and I think that's kind of like where my article really is trying to lean forward, is that we need to, I think, open up these broadening assignments to become, NCOs become familiarized with this strategic kind of policy. The Army JCS intern program, I think, is one way, but in my article, I actually mention there's a 12-day course called Gateway, and it's taught at National Defense University for E6s and E7s. And I think this is a tremendous way that the department is leaning forward on trying to develop these E6s and E7s to understand strategic policy. And you look at the kind of course, it talks about national strategic policy, national military capabilities, regional knowledge, really all the topics I'd love to see NCOs get after and learn. I'll say that the limitation to the Gateway, I think it's a great opportunity, but I think there's a limitation that it's only a 12-day course. there is a huge difference, I think, between learning something and then actually doing that job at these higher levels. I think there's a huge benefit of educating the force on strategic policy and process, but I would say getting NCOs into those strategic policy positions is important for building out that bench. Another component that I kind of thought of, it's not listed in my article, but I think, if we added on, the NCO schools, we take a look at that, BLC, ALC, SLC, I think we can really begin to bake in familiarization courses on strategic policy and process to kind of, marinate that idea with NCOs and understand that there are important processes and policies at work beyond just tactical and operational levels.
Yeah, because one of the things that you kind of alluded to right now is that while this course, the Gateway course, one thing is that it may not be enough, but it's also not a requirement. And so mentioning PME for NCOs like ALC or SLC, including some of this information in there, would kind of make it a forcing function for NCOs to dive into this thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, it's, obviously I would say we don't always want to force the function on certain things. I know there's some people, there's certain training where they're like, oh, this is just check the block training. But I think there is an added benefit. You add a day course into ALC, BLC, that kind of goes over these processes. I think it really helps put things in better perspective at those tactical and operational levels to understand what role, the military plays at that level in higher policy.
Having NCOs attend to these courses or get this education at PME, I can see the importance of that, but what kind of impact do you think these NCOs will have after attending or getting this kind of training? What kind of impact will they have at that tactical or operational level, depending on where they're at?
So, yeah, the impact. I think we can always hope, the impact will, be substantial, but at times, maybe that's not always the case. But I would hope that NCOs who have this training and knowledge, they can, like you said, bring it to the tactical and operational levels to kind of explain to the troops kind of what is going on at these higher levels, give troops an in-depth understanding of why we're doing certain things beyond just, hey, we're on a patch chart and higher said we're going here. Explain, maybe not in specific terms, but more broadly, the processes involved, both internal and external to DoD, how we formulate this policy, how it trickles down all the way down to this tactical and operational level where we're sitting in, foxhole, being cold in Poland or, going through the jungles in PACOM, and the other impact I would say, and I would hope for, and this is maybe more a cultural change when it comes to broadening assignments, is I believe right now that promotion boards for E7s and above would look more favorably on an NCO who was, let's say, a ranger instructor or a drill sergeant or recruiter, more than someone who had an assignment at, let's say, the Pentagon or some other strategic level. I could be wrong in this assumption, and I would welcome any sergeant majors who've sat on these promotion boards to kind of weigh in here. But my gut would tell me that culturally, broadening assignments at the Pentagon would not help an NCO's career as of right now when they're sitting before a promotion board. So the impact I'd love to see is from senior NCOs with this training knowledge to kind of push for culturally changing these assignments as being important for NCOs.
It kind of brings up this question of, my unit only has, let's just say, budget or funds to send me to a course. What would be the deciding factor? What would make that change for me to want to say, I'm going to go to this Gateway course is what I want to sign up for, or battle staff or something like that. That's kind of where we're trying to get NCOs to get after some of this stuff, is that think that this is going to be something that helps them down the road. But I guess seeing the impact initially is kind of difficult.
It is, and I think it goes back, honestly, to the cultural aspect of it. I can only speak for the infantry side. I know and this may be different for different MOSs, but when you look at someone who's infantry getting put on staff, battalion, brigade staff, or working these higher headquarters, or what we call getting pulled off the line to not do combat related or tactical related skills, that's a really hard sell. And I wish I knew the answer to how to incentivize that. I just feel like it's when you're at those levels, the blinders kind of come on, and you only see kind of that tactical level. You don't see a huge benefit in trying to work at these higher levels or working on staffs. I'll admit, when I was active duty, I had no goal or ambition to want to work on staff because I felt it was getting taken off the line, getting taken off that warfighter level. But I look back now, I probably would have had a conversation with myself and be like, hey, there's a lot of benefit, both, understanding how this works for your military career. And I would even say, if you decide that, once you retire or you get out, there's a huge benefit to just understanding working at that staff level position, being able to write, being able to, formulate ideas for leadership. So I admit that's a huge limitation. I think that's a tough one to change.
I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate on this one. You mentioned a few things. So going to this new PME, right? The hard part for me is trying to figure out what the buy-in is, because you just said that somebody who's an ranger instructor is probably going to get picked up over somebody who has this school or internship, if you will. And the other side of that is officers also receive some of this training. So if you have a senior enlisted who have this training as well, and they do have the skills to bring these things to the fight on a tactical and operational level, are we going to get the same buy-in from the officers?
It's a valid point. Officers, this is their lane. Why do we need NCOs kind of crowding the room, trying to understand this? And we look at officers and NCOs. They have, I would say the same mission but different roles. I think the argument is that NCOs are technical experts, and officers are more of those kind of generalist, big picture. But I really do look back. If you look at the platoon level, there's a platoon leader, and then there's the senior enlisted advisor. There's their platoon sergeant. At the company level, you have company commander and their first sergeant. Battalion level and beyond, you have the commander and their sergeant major. And I tend to think about this, and this may just be me, not being at that tactical level really anymore. But, if an organization wants to produce best military advice or best course of action, I think there's a huge benefit in both officers and NCOs understanding this type of strategic level policy and process at work. Both of them having to understand it, I think, would make for a more well-informed organization to come up with options at that strategic level, or explain at the tactical level the how and why of what we're doing. Back to what is the buy-in? That's I would say just a huge limitation within my article, and I think we really need to look at the promotion boards and kind of reevaluate what is seen as a broadening assignment. Put working at that strategic level on par with being a ranger instructor. But that's a tough one. I think it's going to come down to really getting E6s and E7s marinated with strategic policy and the importance of it. So that way, when they become sergeant majors, they're like, oh yeah, this is an important broadening assignment. I think it is on par with being a ranger instructor or a drill sergeant.
We always try to ask the author some process questions on the writing, because one of our biggest complaints from NCOs was that they were either scared to write or they didn't know how to write. And so the more we talk about people's processes, it seems like we get more submissions. So I think it's working. So the first question I always ask people is, what was your process in writing this article? So where did you get the idea? And then how did you form that idea? And then were there any drafts involved, any collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think with all things that people write, it always just starts with a hot take that just immediately crosses your mind, and you're like, yeah, why are certain things like that, or why aren't we talking more about these issues going on? And it really started with kind of talking with my brother and him mentioning, I was like, hey, Justin, he's a sergeant first class, he's a drill sergeant right now. I was like, hey, you should look at trying to apply to this White House Fellows program. It's a really great opportunity to kind of work in DC, rub shoulders with, these kind of higher level policymakers. They could really use that kind of grounded tactical perspective that you bring to the table. And again, he just mentioned, he's like, that sounds really fun. I'd love to, but that would derail my career path. And I was like, I can't blame you, because I would probably be thinking the same way if I was still on active duty. And I started kind of looking around for what articles are people talking about developing strategic enlisted NCOs, and I came across the stuff from the Joint Staff, and I'm like, okay, so this information is being talked about. I would say it's being talked about at very high levels, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of people at these kind of lower levels, NCOs, kind of pounding the pavement, being like, hey, we should definitely take a look at this. So that's what kind of inspired me to write this. And I mean, what I did, I ended up just I researched this question. I obviously referenced these higher level talks, amongst the Joint Staff, and I started looking at kind of papers, maybe at the War College level, to kind of see if anyone had done this before. And I actually found an article by a colonel who talks about the same exact thing, I think back in 2013. So kind of reference, this material, kind of give me a grounded base to make an argument on. And then I just kind of, I made the recommendation based off of my interaction with this Army JCS intern program. When it comes to drafts, I can't tell you the amount of times that I read and reread and sent it to my brother, sent it to some of my friends. I'm like, hey, I need you to look this over. I need you to kind of tell me, do I sound silly here? Like, what am I missing on this? And I'll advise any NCO or anyone that's trying to write an article, and this is not a sponsor or anything, I just use it all the time, is using Grammarly. I can't tell you the amount of times I've used Grammarly to help me, write papers and have it sound, a little bit better. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that is my process, I guess.
Thank you, Sergeant DiMichele, for joining us, and thank you to our audience. Remember to put your knowledge to the page, submit articles, and get published with the NCO Journal. Don't forget to check out our webpage and follow us on social media. We'll catch you next time on the NCO Journal podcast.